Here's a free lesson on coloring crystals from my class, Coloring Book of Shadows, the class. Before we get into the crystals lesson, here is a look at what we will cover in the class. So if this looks interesting to you and you want to learn more, sign up. I think you'll really like it. So this is one of the project pages, and you'll see we cover all of these crystals, different lighting techniques. The candles are lighting them up. There's different highlights and shadows. Here's another one of my favorite project pages. Here's one of the crystals here, real simple, just blue and white. And you can add a lot of dynamic shape to it just with a couple tricks of light that are not that complicated. This here is a mortar and pestle in rose quartz. So I will show you some opaque crystal techniques and some ways to add your own texture and to add like that natural stone look to things. Here's another one of my favorite pages that we'll do. And again, similar basic crystal techniques. This time we get a little fancier with some white gel pen highlights, which are totally optional. And then this one isn't a crystal, but it's a glass jar with a candle, which was really, really fun to do. And then I'll show you how to do kind of this darker yet still colorful background, which is a lot of fun. And then here's one of my other favorite pages from the course, this gorgeous black and gold broom and a crystal. So there's a lot of light there. There's a lot of highlights, some strong contrasts, and optional gold paint. So if this looks like fun to you and you want to know more, then take my course. I think you'll love it. All right, so on to the lesson. Awesome. Are you ready to color some crystals? These are so fun to do, and they might look intimidating, but it's actually pretty easy to get a cool effect if you just play with the light. Now, these are going to be more like starter crystals. They aren't going to be super photorealistic, and we're not going to go too crazy with the technicalities of it. But I'll show you a couple tricks to just get started. So far in this class, we've been talking more about where the light is coming from. And with these crystals, we're not going to be looking at that so much. When light hits crystals, all sorts of things can happen. So it's not going to be so much about the direction of light source, but really more how crystals kind of are lit up. So we'll just start with the basics and then take it from there. Okay, let's go. So for this first one, I'm using orange, brown, and harvest gold. I thought it would make sort of a citrine kind of look to it, so that should be cool. So just starting with the harvest gold, I'm not focusing on where the light is coming from too much. Sort of just going to be central, and then I'll show you a few tricks. The best tip for coloring crystals is contrast of value. If you start looking at some pictures or your own crystals in the light, you will see that there are big highlights of a really bright white contrasted by a dark color on the other side of it. So having the different facets contrasted at the edge, like one of these little squares is dark and the other one is light, that'll really show where and how the light is hitting it. I'll go ahead here, this lower one on the left, I'm going to make the top edge really dark in the harvest gold. But you can see, compared to the one at the top, there's a lot of contrast, and that contrast is making it look like the top one has the light hitting it, and the bottom one is kind of tucked under, and that's not where the light is hitting it, so it's starting to make it look shiny and like a crystal. I know I said I wasn't going to pick a light direction, but now that this crystal is sort of starting to take shape, I'm seeing it kind of hitting the front of it, but a little to the left. So a highlight on the left, a highlight on the front of it. So that means the right-hand side is going to be shadowy. That's just sort of how it's coming to me in my mind. I encourage you to sort of play it by feel, let it be loose, and see what comes to you. Of course, you can look at some reference material before or while you're doing it. A lot of doing crystals is really just playing with it in the moment. So now that I sort of have my loose shape, and you can see there's some contrast between the edges of the facets, I'm going to get the orange pencil and I'm going to start darkening the darkest parts to make it look even darker. And I'm keeping that contrast on the edge there between the facets. The front one is real bright. The one on the top left is a little brighter, and then there's some contrast within each facet too. So one facet doesn't have to have all one color. It could be light on one end and dark on the other end. This is really kind of up to you and to the particular crystal that you're coloring. But I'm going to just darken up what I've already done, and you can see it with even more depth. And at this point, your pencil is probably still pretty light, so you can erase if you want. Now with the brown, which is my darkest color, I'm going to make the shadows even darker. And this is where you really start to see it pop out. And if any places look like they're too light to you or they need something else, more contrast or more depth, you can just go ahead and add that in. Anything that's kind of tucked under or it goes backwards, like away from you, that might be a little darker, so you can use that as a rule, but that really depends. And crystals have light going through them. So if you have highlights on both sides of it, that actually looks realistic instead of just having it on one side. Then going back with the Harvest Gold and adding a little bit more where I feel like I need more mid-tone. And this is really starting to take shape. I feel like it totally looks like a citrine. Back and forth. Now I have the brown again and I'm just darkening it. Anything that I think looks like a little indentation or is farther away from me, just darken it up in the shadows. And back and forth with my 3 colors till I kind of feel like I have the look I want. Oh yeah, that's looking so awesome. And I'm going to keep that hard edge on the bottom there, but add just a little bit of brown. So that looks cool. Let's do the next one. So let's do another one that's sort of like a clear crystal like quartz. And I'm going to use gray and cool gray. So for this one, an easy trick to do if it's like a 3-sided kind of deal like this is to leave the middle the lightest and then shade the 2 sides. So that's an easy way to apply the highlight, kind of a good rule to remember. So I'm going to start by just shading the right side where that facet kind of dips under. I'm going to leave most of my highlight in the middle, in that window one, and the one in the middle center, and then shade the sides a little bit. But I'm going to leave some highlights kind of interspersed around it too. But for now, sometimes when I look at a crystal, the tips are a little bit darker for some reason. Sometimes they're not, so it just depends. In this one, when that window is kind of lit up, the other ones around it seem a little darker. So I'm going to just kind of darken the ones around it, especially the 2 sides. And you can really start to see it take shape where that one in the middle is left as the highlights, and then there are other highlights sort of bouncing around it, but not too technical. Most of the contrast is in that center window. I'm using the cool gray now, and that is very similar. It just adds a tiny bit of blue. It's optional. You could use any color, but it's just a tiny bit of contrast to the color there. Maybe add a couple stripes or some darkness in the darker parts if you see fit to that. That one in the very center looks like it's dipping down to me, so I've darkened it up, but left a highlight running along the side so it looks like the light's hitting it. Cool. So with the clear crystals, you really don't need to do a lot of stuff. They're clear, but a little bit of gray or light blue or whatever kind of a tone you want to give it, it goes a long way. So have fun with those. So let's get fancy for this one. I wanted to do like an ametrine, like an amethyst citrine mix. So I use Harvest Gold, orange, and brown, the same as I did for the citrine, and then violet and ultraviolet for the amethyst. So first I'm starting really lightly, just drawing a couple of the striations or the lines of the different colors. So a good rule of thumb to remember is to not make them too even. So if you're doing 3 lines, make 2 of them closer together and 1 of them farther away. I'm just sort of really loosely blocking this out. And for this one, I'm going to follow the same rule as the last time, where the center facets are going to be brighter, and then the 2 edges along the sides are going to be darker, and that'll just be an easy rule to follow. Doing a 2-color crystal is already a little more complicated, so I'm going to keep the lighting simple. Then when I like where my stripes are, I'm going to add the orange just to darken them up a little bit and add a little more color to them. Then the ultraviolet is sort of the lighter of my 2 purples. So I'm going to go in and block out where all the amethyst parts are between the golden stripes. And just back and forth as I need, like as I see, maybe the tip should be more of the yellow and a little bit more glowing. Then I'll add the purple or the violet. Not too even anywhere. It should have a lot of variation. The stripes shouldn't be too even or anything like that. And then here I want to start thinking about leaving the front lighter because my front facets are going to be the highlight. but that'll really start to come to shape in a little bit. Add a little variation in the gold, some darker parts. Now that I kind of see it more coming to shape, I'll press a little harder with the Harvest Gold because I am more confident with where that is. It just starts to look like where it wants to be. If you're not sure, don't color that part yet. Sometimes it just takes a minute to come to you. And this just takes a gentle touch and a little bit of time. Keep looking at it from a distance, kind of seeing where maybe it wants to be a little darker. I'm still trying to keep variation between the facets, like I darkened the top right there a little bit to really differentiate it from the yellow. And now I really want to start thinking about the sides being darker. Not too late to erase if you haven't gone too dark yet. Once I have it pretty well blocked out, I'm going to start focusing on darkening those edges. So I have my violet purple, which is my darkest one, and I'm going to, especially the violet, the purple parts of the crystal, I'm going to start really darkening those. You can see the front starts to really pop out when you darken the edges. So we're going to use our complementary colors trick here to dull the edges down and give them more contrast to the front. So the complementary or opposite color to purple is yellow, which is convenient because we're already using those colors here. So I'm going to use orange instead of the yellow just because it's a little bit darker, but it'll still dull down the purple. And you can really see that dulls it and makes the front facet stand out even more. Then I'm going to get the brown pencil, which is a little bit more neutral, and kind of blend in that orange. Oh yeah, that turned out so awesome. I love it. So now let's do a little malachite heart. It'll be fun. I have 3 colors of green here: pine green, green, and shamrock. The green and the shamrock are the 2 that I'm going to use to make the stripes. So first I'm just going to go in and really loosely block out all the stripes and the colors, alternating between the green and the shamrock pencils. So for this one, I think I'm going to make the light source coming from the lower right-hand side. It's just sort of calling to me to come from there. So that means that the upper left-hand side is going to get more of the shadow, and I'm going to try to leave more light on the lower right. So I'm shading in the top with the green pencil, really loosely blocking it out, but just trying to add in a little bit of shadow where that's going to fall so I can start to see it. Then with the darkest green, the pine green, I'm going to darken that when I'm ready, when I see that that's really where the shadow is going to be. Then add a little more darkening of the stripes. And the stripes can have variation between them. Of course, I'm going to leave the highlight, a very subtle highlight on the lower right, but you can see there's a white space left there. And then just going back and forth with my 3 colors, darkening it as I see it, focusing on the upper left-hand side to add the shadow, just tiny bits on the lower right. And you can add your own stripes too. If you think it needs more, go ahead and add in some more with your darkest color. Then one more time, let's use our complementary color trick. The complementary or opposite of green is red. So with a mahogany pencil, kind of a darker red, I'm going to just deepen those shadows, dull them out a little bit, but it'll give it a cool look, just like an extra depth to the dark side there. Awesome, that looks pretty good. This is just an example from one of my books. This one has no shading, and then this one has a little bit in the top corner and then the side corners. Notice where it's dark, the opposite facet is light, and then this one's just a little bit different pattern, like the shadings at the bottom in the center and then the top on the sides. And you can apply this to any crystal you color. Just follow this pattern and use whatever colors you're going for, and it gives you an easy way to see different patterns of light. So speaking of patterns of light, let's try a clear quartz that is pretty transparent. So as you can see on my example on the left-hand side there, it really looks transparent because there's a lot of light coming through it. And the way I achieve that is by leaving a lot of white space. So I basically took that pattern that I just showed you on the example sheet. I'm coloring opposite facets and just doing like half of them or a quarter of them and leaving a lot of white space. And that diagonal white space is going to become the transparent part. And we're going to amplify that by adding a little bit of background. And you can see it at the bottom 3 facets there. It goes dark, light, dark. And then on the sides, it goes dark, light, dark. And I kind of try to do opposites there. So leave light on the opposite of where it's dark and dark on the opposite where it's light. It doesn't have to be exact, but that helps to make it look shiny. And then for the background here, I'm just putting in some very rough colors in green and blue just to make it look like there's a little bit of a background. And then when I add that into the center of the crystal, it really ups the transparency. It is a trick of the eye and it makes it look like the crystal is transparent and shining through. So you can just play with this and find out how much background you want showing through, how much transparency you want on the crystal. Just keep coloring it darker and darker. If you want it less transparent, leave more white and more background if you want it more transparent. And then adding a few lines like this, a little bit of flaw to the crystal or some variation to it, a few stripes, a few cracks, that really helps to give some detail and add to the realism of it. These are all just things you can experiment with. There's no right or wrong. There's no hard and fast rules to it, but by applying some of these patterns like dark versus light and opposites, leaving a light facet in between 2 dark facets or leaving half of a white facet between 2 dark facets can really help. So now I have an almost black pencil. It's like a really dark blue, and I'm adding a bit of super dark blue to some of the darkest parts of the facets, and it's really helping to make that crystal way more bold and just kind of way more, I don't know, more dynamic. Because if I look at a quartz, it has some pretty dark, they're not the highlights, it has some pretty dark shadows to it. So if you just, once you get a rough with like a medium gray, if you go in with a real dark gray or even a black, you can keep adding and add more dynamic shadow to your crystal and get it the way you like. Some people like to color crystals more flat, and that's perfectly fine too. Some people like more light, more shadow, and it might just depend on your application, the look you're going for, or what kind of crystal you're coloring. So there is no right and wrong. Again, just keep trying different things and see what feels right to you. See what you like to do and what looks good to your eye. And then this is the exact same technique I just showed you, but using purple and yellow instead of a gray pencil. So I kind of did my first round of a purple, maybe an amethyst or something like that. And then if you want it less transparent or more opaque, just keep coloring it in. So you can either darken the shadows like that to make it look really, really shiny, or if you start filling in that white highlight and just very slowly layering in your base color like purple or whatever, it'll look less and less transparent. So you can work with the amount of transparency the crystal has, and you can just keep going. You can keep filling it in or coloring it just how you like. Here's an example of a smoky quartz where I really used the same technique. I just used some colors of brown and maybe a little tan in the middle, and it made it look like a transparent smoky quartz. And then don't forget to look at some real examples if you have crystals. Notice the patterns. Notice how they look when there is light shining through them, what it looks like when it has different colors of backgrounds behind them, how the light hits it, like any patterns or stripes you see, if you see like a diagonal stripe or you see a vertical highlight or something like that, take note of it and then just try to replicate the basic patterns. You don't have to get every detail, but just try to look at it for inspiration when you color. Well, I hope that gave you a good start to coloring crystals. There are so many variations of them and they all look different, so it's hard to show you all of them, but by following a couple of tricks and just looking at them and seeing how the light falls, you can really start pretty simply and do a lot. So your assignment for this lesson is to color some crystals. I gave you a lot on the practice sheet. You don't have to do all of them, but just maybe do a couple of them and see what you can do. And if you want to share what you've colored, feel free to post it below or in the Facebook group.